Hi everyone. So I'm Jacek. This will not be the usual techie presentation because I'm gonna talk about the law. And this is like the usual title I'm using, blockchain the law. But actually each time I'm saying about something different because the whole environment changes very quickly. I'm not sure how relevant it is for developers because usually people that are interested in such topics are business owners, startups that have something to do with blockchain and are interested in legal consequences. But still, I'd like to tell you about a few things. And first, tell why blockchain is legally relevant. If you are in this space, you know that especially in the last year, there was a lot of noise about legal issues, especially because of the ICO craze. And second, I'd like to tell you about what is the current lawmakers and regulators' approach to blockchain and its applications. And lastly, I have some experience on cooperating with developers on creating structures that are based on blockchain and at the same time they are legally meaningful. For example, writing smart contracts that work at the same time as a blockchain solution at the same time as legal contracts. So I can share a some experience on that. So starting from the first point, why blockchain is a legally relevant topic. And you can think about this question in another way. Why don't you see lawyers on other types of technological meetups, such as Python meetups or anything like that? And the reason is that blockchain is not just a technology. And of course, I understand your perspective as technical people. You are probably seeing blockchain as a technology, but it is something more. It is an economic and social phenomenon, and maybe I'll explain it more on the next slide. But what I wanted to say is that blockchain is now, at least in my opinion, slowly entering the mainstream. It is not just about crypto enthusiasts, but we see real life applications being developed in the blockchain space. And if you are in a new place, usually you have to play along the rules of this place. And accordingly, blockchain is entering the mainstream. And in mainstream, you have to play the rules of the mainstream, which are mostly legal rules. And we can easily see that on the ICO market, but not only. And now, very short explanation why blockchain is a challenge for the law. So why it is something new, why it's a technology that makes a difference, and why so many lawyers now are starting to thinking about blockchain. At the same time, blockchain developers or creators of blockchain solutions are concerned with legal issues. So basically, there are three reasons. First of all, we have no particular jurisdiction, so that if anything happens on the blockchain, it is very difficult to say where it happens, right? So, for example, when I'm making a Bitcoin transaction, you may start to think where this transaction is happening. Because, lawyers are used to think about word being, partitioned to different jurisdictions, right? I'm a Polish lawyer, which means that I'm trained to work on a Polish law, but my knowledge of a Russian law is very limited, Russian or law of any other jurisdiction. And that's something that is, not usual in the blockchain world, right? When you have just one blockchain and everything is happening there, not in any particular country. Another thing why blockchain is something new for lawyers and extremely interesting at the same time is that you have some autonomous actors on the blockchain, for example, smart contracts. So, and blockchain itself is a kind of autonomous actor, right? It is a sphere where transactions are happening peer-to-peer without any central coordinator. And from the lawyer's point of view, you are always looking for an entity that would be responsible for something, right? For example, when in your relationship with the bank, when you are sending a transaction to someone else, when something goes wrong, bank is the entity that holds the liability for that. Here, it is very difficult to find a responsible person. And third, there is no sovereign, right? It is very similar to the first point. There is no entity that would make something, would change something, right? There is no authority to which you could appeal in order to achieve something, right? So this is also something unusual, because we are used to a world when we have a country, we have a president, we have some kind of power, we have entities or authorities that have this power. We have courts, right? When there is something wrong in your life, when someone causes some damage to you, you can go to court. There are no courts on the blockchain, right? And you can compare this situation to the internet, right? Because internet is also a kind of decentralized space, something totally different than the usual world, right? But the difference is that what the internet, and this is the comparison that you probably know very well, this is very popular, but this is also meaningful, that what internet has done for the information, blockchain is doing with value, right? So internet allowed you to send you information to anyone else without in principle, without any central authority. And blockchain allows you to, and related technologies allow you to do the same with value. And that's why it is becoming a huge challenge. And now, what I called prongs of attacks. So how does the regulatory approach look like currently? And what we lack is a comprehensive regulatory approach. So there is nothing like the Blockchain Act, right? Or a blockchain law in any particular country in the world. So a law to which we could refer when we have any legal issue with the blockchain. There is nothing like that. In reality, what we see is just the reaction to particular issues or to particular problems. So and especially to problems that are very hyped, right? Like cryptocurrencies or ICOs and tokens. So when cryptocurrencies are on the rise, or ICOs were on the rise and still are, we had many authorities, public authorities, regulators jumping on the space and trying to say what do they think about all of that. But there is no coordinated policy, as I said, no general blockchain law. So what we can do is to focus on just some applications and say what were the developments of so far. And I picked to talk a bit about cryptocurrencies. This is like the most obvious example, the first application of blockchain technology, and second about ICOs and tokens, which are quite a boring topic, but quite popular at the same time. So first of all, you have, very briefly, you have an issue of monetary monopoly of the state, right? If you have virtual currencies, you have the question, what with the state currency, right? We have one state currency usually in one country. What in a situation when you have 1,000 currencies on the coin market cap, and each of them, or many of them, are calling themselves currencies. So this was a really concern, especially in the early days of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And now it looks like it is a low risk because it is generally acknowledged that since these currencies are decentralized and distributed, they are not, a risk to state currencies. But this is changing a bit. I'm monitoring very closely what central banks are saying about that. And it is quite interesting to see the change, right? With the rising market cap of top cryptocurrencies, you can see how the officers of central banks are starting to modify their views, right? They are starting to say that it is not so, it is not, they are not saying this is not a problem anymore. They are saying that it might be a problem in the future, for example. And accordingly, you also have some warnings, for example, from the National Bank of Poland, from last year on cryptocurrencies. Second, you have the protection of users, right? When you have, the exchange rates of cryptocurrencies, volatile like that, you have the issue of protection of users, protection of consumers, right? Especially that, for example, in Poland, we have fake currencies expanding on the market. So, projects that are positioning themselves as legitimate cryptocurrencies, but at the same time, they're Ponzi schemes, right? So you may expect some regulatory actions also from that perspective. And lastly, I think there is also an issue of money laundering and terrorist financing. There is some evidence that cryptocurrency may be used or is used in order to launder money. And as a result, you have some laws that address that, right? And what is done is that edges are regulated. So in principle, cryptocurrency exchanges, right? Because they are, the intermediaries, the gatekeepers between the traditional financial world and the blockchain world. They are exchanging tokens for fiat money and so on. And in the EU, you have new law that is called the Anti-Money Laundering Directive that aims to achieving exactly that. Regulated exchanges, in fact, it will mean that, for example, when buying cryptocurrency on exchanges, they will have to identify you, right? To limit the anonymous use of cryptocurrencies. What is the Polish invention is that not only crypto to fiat exchange will be regulated by these laws, but also probably crypto to crypto exchanges will be regulated. So for example, Ether to token exchange, right? Which is something specifically Polish and is quite dangerous, but we'll see how it will develop in the future. And the last thing about cryptocurrency, you have also money transmitter, or how it's called in the EU or in Poland, payment services law. So in principle, we regulate payments intermediaries, right? When there is one entity that is like, I don't know, MasterCard or anything like that, is intermediating in payments, usually these entities are regulated. In the EU, this does not affect cryptocurrencies, but in the US, the situation is quite different. And especially recently, people are starting to wondering whether Lightning Network is not something that was mentioned by Paweł, would not be, Lightning Network nodes would not be regulated as money transmitters. So this is also something relevant legally relevant for cryptocurrencies. Now ICOs and tokens. So this is something that probably most of the people were talking about last year. For me personally, the issue is a bit boring because in fact ICO is a very straightforward process, right? So everyone heard about ICOs? Who did not? Okay, so everyone heard. For me, it's boring because it's not the ICO as it looks like currently on the market. It's not something the most fascinating I've ever seen, because usually you have just one central issuer that is issuing something. You have buyers, right? Normally you don't have any kind of decentralization. You usually connect with blockchain technology, but anyway, it has some role to play probably. And the case with ICOs and tokens is that the legal status of the token determines everything. So it determines application of regulations to this ICO, determines how the exchange of such token looks like legally, and so on. So most of the people are wondering whether tokens are not securities, so papiery wartościowe in Polish. And this particular topic has caused many lawyers to invade the whole space, right? Last year, together with the rise of ICOs, together with the money flowing into the system because of ICOs, many lawyers got interested in the topic. And the reason is that there are no bright lines, right? You cannot say precisely when token is a security and when it's not. There is no bright line. So you need to adopt a case-by-case approach. And in practice, it means that you need to ask a lawyer each time when you are wondering whether a given token is a security or not. And there are some market developments. We don't have time to talk about that in depth, but this is quite interesting. That you had, so basically you have this distinction between utility tokens. So these tokens that have some consumptive use, right? You can use them, for example, for obtaining some kind of service or product. And you have security tokens. So these investments tokens, these tokens that give you some right to, for example, future cash flows or something like that. And what you could see on the market last year was the rise of utility tokens. And it was driven to a large extent by the risk of applying securities laws. So for example, people were thinking, okay, I'd like to give my token holders, so I'm going to do an ICO, I'd like to give my token holders real rights so that they will buy this token, right? I will promise them, for example, that I will, I don't know, pay them 20% commission on transactions happening in my network, right? But at the same time, after consulting their lawyers, they decide, oh no, that's risky because we might fall into securities regulation. So let's do some kind of utility token. Let's promise this guy something, you know, less bold, but at the same time more legally safe for us. And that's how, you know, the whole legal framework impacted how the whole environment looks like, right? My guess is that without such legal interpretations, we would not see so many utility tokens in the whole space. And at the same time, at the moment, what we are seeing is embracing securities. So I'm seeing many new projects that are saying from the very beginning, our tokens are securities, or blockchain projects that are developing, I don't know, decentralized exchanges that will at the same time comply with securities. This is quite interesting phenomenon, and I'm curious how it will develop in the future. And now I have, like, I could talk about approaches in different jurisdictions. I've researched many of them. Not sure if it's very relevant here or interesting for you, but so I can leave that for questions simply. Okay, so the US, this is like the country everyone is talking about, and here we have two. So I'm a Polish lawyer, so I can't say about, you know, every country like a lawyer from these countries, but I will tell you about my views. So in the US, you have two things. First of all, quite a restrictive approach, right? There are some legal interpretations in the US that even, you know, every single token is a security under the US law. And at the same time, you have huge legal uncertainty. So you really don't know, right? The borders are so unclear that it is really difficult to say whether a given token is a security under American law or not. At the same time, the US is a country where there's a lot of capital also in the crypto world. So many people are trying to attract the US customers, which might trigger the securities regulations, but at the same time trying to say that they are not approaching in the US. So the usual clause that you can find in the terms of virtually all ICO projects in the world is that if you are a citizen or an entity from the US, you cannot participate in our ICO, right? This is the reaction of reaction to the situation in that country. Also taking into account that, you know, the American authorities have particularly long arms, right? And even if you are, I don't know, in Poland, in China, or any other country, you should think about this jurisdiction, right? Because they are quite, you know, they are quite focused on protecting their citizens, their investors, right? So even if an ICO is happening in another country, sometimes this American law and these American institutions might also, you know, got interested about you. In the EU, it is a quite interesting situation because we have like EU-level securities law, right? But at the same, that is basically implemented at the national levels. But the situation still is unclear, so there is no bright border. And this is something that, you know, that is repeated in all jurisdictions, that is really difficult to say whether a given token is a security or not. In fact, when I was reading the statements of different issued by different regulators in different jurisdictions, what was like, you know, repeated like mantra was token might be or not, or might be or might not be a security, right? Which is not very helpful. And also let's say the EU regulator, which is called ESMA, has also issued its statement, and this is like very similar to many others, saying that, you know, depending on the circumstances, something might be or might not be a security, which, as I said, is not very helpful. In Poland, the situation is similar. Many people are fleeing out of Poland. They are trying to, you know, escape this jurisdiction when thinking about ICO, which is not always correct, right? Because in fact, in any jurisdiction, you are facing basically very similar problems. And for example, when you are offering something that is rather a utility token, there are, in fact, a pure utility token, and a lawyer can say you there is no risk or virtually no risk of applying securities law. In fact, there is nothing that prevents you from doing an ICO in Poland, except some other factors like tax laws, right? Because sometimes it might be more tax efficient to do it anywhere else. But at the same time, sometimes the situation is quite complicated, right? Because, for example, when you are in Poland, your developers are in Poland, the whole project is Poland, but you are doing your ICO somewhere else, then this Polish factor will hit you sooner or later, right? Because you would like to transfer some money here or pay people that are here and things like that, right? Singapore is also one of the top places when ICOs are being done at the moment, and it is not that they are not strict. This is rather due to their, you know, general friendliness towards investment activity, right? So they have, as far as I know, they also have some securities, so that's for sure, of course. But at the same time, they were able, for example, to provide some examples, right? They issued a statement, and they included there some cases, right? For example, let's assume that the person A is doing something and something happens, right? And then legal qualification, right? They were able to issue some really helpful advice how their law will work in practice. Estonia, another top place at the moment. They are quite. What is great there is that, as far as I know, we can quite easily reach regulator, right? So we can get an interpretation from the regulator how things look like, which is cool very often. But at the same time, this is a country in the European Union, right? So general rules apply there as well. And France, this is quite interesting. I included it on the list because their statement, or I mean, statement of their regulator was one of the best I read, right? They revealed very impressive knowledge about their market and ICOs taking place at their market. And there are also some other interesting developments in that country. So that's like some examples, because I don't know how many countries we have in the world, but I'm sure that
Microphone.
Do you know how it is from Belarus perspective? Because there is a statement that they legalized all ICOs and cryptocurrencies at all, and there is no, and it's all. Do you know something about legal issues in Belarus?
Yeah, so I know what I read. And by the way, during the break, there is one guy for Belarus who has some interesting insights into what's happening in his country. So maybe I leave it for him. Basically, there are some tax rebates, right? So you don't have to pay tax on your profits from your ICO and things like that. But another thing that is important to consider is that sometimes you have to look not just on legal issues, right? Sometimes there are some practicalities that are equally as important as legal stuff, right? For example, if there is a cool jurisdiction and you can make your ICO there in a safe way, but at the same time there are some restriction on access to bank accounts, it might occur that it is not a good jurisdiction anymore, because you would need such bank accounts sooner or later, right? And that's the case of some other jurisdictions. But you know, what I can advise is to not focus or maybe not go with hype when choosing a jurisdiction, right? Because very often Poland might not be a bad jurisdiction for many projects. Or don't choose just, you know, Switzerland, which is like top ICO jurisdiction, or don't choose Singapore or Estonia without making a real check what's you know, what your project is about, what's important for your project, and how laws of different jurisdictions would impact your project, right? Okay, this is like a slide for you. This is a question whether anyone just writing code should be worried about all of that. So generally, yes, there might be some reasons to consider. So first of all, very often you are programming on a public blockchain, right? And this public blockchain has a cryptocurrency somewhere in the background, right? This cryptocurrency, like in Ethereum, allows for, you know, decentralization and well functioning of the whole system. And this is why, you know, very often you hear from authorities that are saying, you know, Bitcoin no, or cryptocurrency no, blockchain yes, which is, you know, very often not correct, because they are not getting that it is somehow connected, right? And accordingly, if you have some laws that apply to cryptocurrency aspect, right, AML laws that I've already described, then you might find yourself in a situation when your application, where there is some cryptocurrency in the background allowing for functioning the whole system, has some impact on how your solution looks like. Also, when you are developing a token, which is quite you know, fashionable recently, you might want it to be traded, right? Or, you know, even if you are not going if you don't want it to be traded, it might be traded anyway. So that also might somehow impact you, right? Because this token that you are developing might have some legal status that might trigger application of some regulations. At the same time, you might want to interact with others, right? With some services, for example, with exchanges or any other dApps, which might be regulated somehow, right, in the future. But generally, so I don't want to scare you, but very often this legal analysis is necessary, right? It is a must when you are doing an ICO, when you are issuing a token. But even if you are doing something different, but it has something to do with, for example, financial services, somehow, this is a must. You have to consult a lawyer. I'm not saying that such a lawyer would give you some useful advice. That's like another thing, but I think it is a good idea. Also, when you are dealing with some other stuff like, I don't know, identity, or thinking whether, you know, something that you are developing would have some legal meaning, right? For example, when legal action, something concluded on blockchain, would be recognized in the real world, right? This is a question that should be answered by a lawyer, because it might occur that something that you are planning would have, you know, the opposite legal consequences that something that you are planning. And now a bonus, so something that I mentioned. Let's see whether it works. This is my profile on GitHub. I have 2 commits. One for you know, one for opening the account, I think. Another one for one real commit back at the time when I was at Neufund. So what we are doing there was really, you know, writing legally meaningful smart contracts, right? And that meant, there is a folder legal. that meant that when taking part in our ICO, which was not an ICO, by the way, but let's say that it was something similar, by sending the transaction, signing the transaction that via which you were sending some coins to the smart contracts that govern this, let's say, ICO, you are also signing to a smart contract, right? A smart contract and at the same time a legal contract that underpins the whole system. And we might have a look on how this contract look like. So I'm not gonna say about everything, but basically there were some interesting stuff, which is much of that is quite basic, but at the same time, no one is doing that, which is quite interesting. So, for example, we wrote this paper that is a legal contract that takes some data from the blockchain in order to, make itself complete, right? So, for example, parties in this contract are identified by blockchain public keys, right? In order to ensure that the person that is signing the transaction becomes a party to that contract, right? Also, we needed to come up with a solution to the issue: what has a primacy in case there are some conflicts, right? For example, is that a smart contract that should have a primacy? So what happens on the blockchain is binding for the parties, or maybe there are some cases in which a legal contract should have primacy, right? It is especially relevant where there are some bugs in the code, or you need to change something, right? Something that was already programmed. How to do that? And we dealt with that in a way that we specified some parts of this legal contract that cannot be changed by anyone, and some parts of the legal contract that might be changed, right? And accordingly, the smart contract needed to be constructed in a way that allows for that as well. So we dealt with a few things. So this the transactions that are somehow connected to this smart contract contain hash to this legal contract contain hash of this legal contract. There is a mechanism of updating this legal contract, because this is more like terms and conditions. So sometimes it will need to be updated. Also, there are some provisions on forks. So when there is a fork in the network, you have to specify legally which one will be recognized, and so on. This was like a cool exercise. Yeah, and you can have a look on the legal contract and on the corresponding code as well. And this was, I think it was quite cool. It was like a very basic exercise, but it really showed me that it is really possible for making legally meaningful solutions on the blockchain, which was really nice. And that there is a cool possibility of lawyers and devs working together or creating something really nice. Now back to the presentation. Yeah, another thing, like I think the last one I wanted to talk about is about tokenization. This is something you probably hear about very often. Tokenization is a concept of tokenizing different stuff, right? For example, we could have share tokens that represent these shares, right? Or more often tokens that represent some digital value, right? Tokens, all these tokens that were developed and issued through these all ICOs that happened in the last months, where in order to give them value, you have to bind them with something, right? For example, with some rights to use some service or product and so on. And you also see a trend of tokenizing some real assets, real world assets, right? Like real estate, securities, or commodities, right? In order to put some value onto the blockchain, in order to allow, for example, to blockchain transactions governing real estate transactions, right? So that you can interact on the blockchain with real-world assets. And you know, it is quite funny to see such projects because mostly something like that is a legal challenge, right? Because, for example, real estate transactions or securities transactions are something that are governed in the reality that we live in, are governed by law, by the law, right? So they are not they can't be enforced if there is no legal structure behind them. So be cautious when you see, for example, a project that says we are tokenizing real estate, because in fact it is a very difficult venture, right? It is not easy to develop something like that, especially if that's gonna work in different jurisdictions, right? Because in every jurisdiction you have different legal framework. Sometimes you, for example, like in Poland, you need a notary in order to transfer a real property, right? A real estate. With real-world assets, you usually need a legal structure, and you will see many such projects developing in the future because we see projects like many projects relating to securities, some oil tokens, right? Real estate tokens and things like that, and all of that needs a robust legal structures which are not always a standard. And lastly, if you are interested in all what I was saying about that, there is a similar event, but for lawyers, which is organized by something that's called Warsaw Legal Hackers. It's happening next week, or I think it's next week. It's called Blockchain, the Law and Lawyers. I'll be speaking there again, but this time to lawyers. And there will be also some other speakers and many lawyers interested in the topic. I think that there are like, I don't know, 170 lawyers currently subscribed to this meeting. So if you want to meet a crowd of blockchain-hungry lawyers, you can go there. And that's all, thanks. Questions?
Okay, it works. My question is about law and tokenization, you just said before. When do you think law will actually catch up with real world assets? Because like, I think like I heard like only like countries like India, for example, trying to put cars on the blockchain, but like those information are really rare, and it doesn't really look like lawmakers are even trying to legalize or in any way just put a legal structure to tokenization. Or am I missing something?
Yeah, so the question is whether you need authorities to do anything like that, right? Because so for example, you have a security, right? Which was usually a piece of paper, right? Now it is possible to digitize these securities, and maybe indeed you need some, legal improvements in order to allow securities to live on the blockchain. But at the same time, very often it will be just, structures that you build for yourself, right? When you're building, some standard solutions, and you would like, a piece of paper to mean something. You are achieving that not by changing regulations. You are achieving them something like that by giving a correct contract structure, right? That someone promises that will do something like that, or not anything else, right? So that's not always an issue of changing regulations, but very often that's an issue of creating some market standards of how things should look like.
Sure, I get it. But my question was about more open markets like real estates and stuff like that.
Perhaps the most significant obstacle, at least in Poland, but it happens in many jurisdictions, to tokenizing real estate, is that in order to transfer real estate, right, the title to real estate, you have to go to the notary, right? And when you think about the reasons for that, it was the security of the exchange, right? So that everyone knows that what is in Księga Wieczysta, right, is correct, right? It is like the binding solution. And now we have all the digital world, right? And you are starting to wondering how to, how to put all this structure into digital, right? And at the same time, you have this blockchain world that offers a solution, right? You have public keys, you have transactions that go through without an intermediary, so without a court and so on. But at the same time, do you really want to move the whole system to blockchain in the shape as it is now, right? When there is a hack on the exchange and half of the real estate in Warsaw just disappears, or someone owns some public key on the blockchain just owns the real estate.
Yeah, I get it, and I just even don't know authorities, if they wanted to do this real estate exchanges on a blockchain, which blockchain would they choose? Even would it be some sort of national blockchain?
So that's why what we should expect or demand from authorities is that they allow some open solutions, right? Some solutions that will demand something from you, right? But will allow for digitizing of assets at the same time, right? I'm not sure whether it can be done with real estate, which is particularly centralized and state-owned in a way that state controls the way how it's being transferred. But securities, why not? And it's currently happening, for example, in Delaware, in the state of Delaware in the US, or even in France at the moment, that they are allowing securities to live on the blockchain, right? So that they could be transferred without the intermediary, without the exchange, and so on. These are still some early developments, but we'll see more in the future, I'm sure about it.
Okay, sure, thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. You mentioned state's monopoly on the emission of the currencies. I believe in the context of Poland. It made me think of a legal situation in neighboring countries like Switzerland, but I think also in Germany actually. Also, banks can issue currencies, I believe, their own currencies. Like in some areas, some local dwellers, local inhabitants use these different currencies potentially, other than euro, let's say. It makes me think, and I wonder if the state monopoly in Poland for issuing currency only applies just to złoty currency, or does it apply to just any currency issued within Polish territory? How is it actually stated in the law? Does this monopoly apply actually only to złoty or to any kind of currency issued?
So when you read the laws, of course, it applies just to zloty, right? Like what is set in the law is that zloty is the official currency in Poland, right? And the National Bank of Poland is the only entity that can issue that currency, right? In the forms of coins and banknotes, right? Officially, this is what is the legal what we call legal tender, so the official currency of the country. But what's the background of it, or the goal of this question? Are you thinking about issuing?
I was thinking, like you mentioned, it as one of the challenges, I guess, considering law and a blockchain and running some blockchain-related initiatives, including, I guess, cryptocurrencies. So I was thinking if this state's monopoly actually limits some capabilities of let's say, creating a cryptocurrency based on blockchain technology legally in Poland. But since it just applies to złoty, then I believe just the fact that the Polish National Bank has the privilege of monopoly in issuing the banknotes and coins does not actually apply to this cryptocurrencies.
Of course, the powers of the National Bank of Poland does not mean monopoly to issue zloty, right? This is the monopoly to issue money, right,
yeah,
or currency.
Coins and banknotes.
Yes. So, and the interpretation is that with cryptocurrency, you are not limiting this monopoly, right? If you were saying, I'm gonna issue, I don't know, gold ducats, right, or any other currency, and you were trying to make it right, the alternative for zloty, you might find yourself in troubles, right? It is what was happening in the U.S. You know, prior to Bitcoin, when you have Liberty Reserve or some other decentralized forms of alternative currencies, and you know, authors of these schemes were prosecuted, right, and put into jail because of, you know, infringing this or you know, breaking this state monopoly for money issuance. But and so cryptocurrencies are not a problem at the moment. So let's say you are launching a new blockchain, new cryptocurrency tomorrow. Currently, it's not a problem, but you can see the change of tone in what central bankers say about all of that, right? They are starting to say that there might be some systemic risks connected to cryptocurrencies, in the context that, for example, banks may acquire cryptocurrencies, their value might go to zero, and that there will be, you know, a systemic collapse of the whole financial system, right? This is the context. But there is an apparent change, right? I would not be so sure that it will not develop further, right? Because if you are thinking about that, these cryptocurrencies, if adopted on the market not as speculative assets as it is now, but as real currencies, as stable currencies, this is eroding the state monopoly to issue currencies, right? So this is something that people are not talking at the moment because it's not a problem at the moment. But my guess is that it might be a problem in the future.
Thank you. And have you heard of any rumors at the governmental level that there are some initiatives blockchain related? Because I've heard that they have some department connected with blockchain, so probably they are inventing something. But are you aware? What is this?
You are talking about Poland. So first of all, you have implementation of this EU law that I've mentioned, right? The anti-money laundering law that will, for example, apply to exchanges, right? This is like the first thing, and it might go further, as I also mentioned, into regulating, for example, crypto-to-crypto exchange, right? So that, for example, if there were a shapeshift in Poland, exchanging, I don't know, Bitcoin to Ether or anything like that, it might also, for example, have to identify its clients, right? This is something that would happen only in Poland, as far as I know, at the moment. So that's the first thing, implementation of these laws. Second, you have some, you know, Polish ideas of how to deal with the topic. For example, there was an idea for a central database of accounts, so a central database of all, for example, bank accounts in Poland, right? And what they designed was that also cryptocurrency accounts would be included in the database, right? So in practice, that would mean, for example, that your public key would be associated with your name and surname and included in this database, which was, of course, stupid because you might, you know, generate blockchain public keys as you know, in thousands or even more, right? So there are some, you know, ideas, you know, for example, people at the Ministry of Finance are seeing that cryptocurrencies are used for money laundering, and they are trying to react to that, right? That's the second thing. The third thing is that everyone knows that there is, you know, not very positive approach of National Bank of Poland and the Polish regulator, the KNF, Komisja Nadzoru Finansowego, to the issue, right? And that's why some time ago they launched a campaign, Uważaj na kryptowaluty, beware of cryptocurrencies, right? It is like educational campaign that aims of informing potential investors on the risks involved in cryptocurrencies. And there are also some positive signs at the Ministry of Digital Affairs. There was a stream called Blockchain Digital Currencies, group of people. I was part of that were proposing some legislative changes, writing reports, reacting to these legislative proposals, and so on. So this is like the overview of what's happening now.
Sorry, apart from the regulations and law, there are not any practical initiatives being taken right now, right?
Regulators.
No, but by this Ministry of
Digital Affairs.
Digital Affairs.
No, nothing I'm aware of. Right? There were some ideas for using blockchain in the public sector, right? But I don't think that there is anything cryptocurrency or blockchain specific happening right now, except what I've already mentioned. There is, for example, a new thing at the Polish financial regulator, which is called Innovation Hub. So if you are developing something that is that somehow belongs to fintech, right? And it is like not clear legally how it will qualify and so on. You can apply there, and they will help you, right? They will say whether you should apply for a license or can explain some doubts, legal doubts, regulatory doubts that you have. But it is something new. It has started like a few days ago, so it's difficult to say how it will develop. But if you are developing something, something that has something to do with financial regulation, blockchain, you might be interested in that, because that's an opportunity of reaching out directly to the people that would like to regulate you.
Another question?
Okay, so several days ago there was information that one of the banks closed account because of trading with cryptocurrencies. And how would you comment that according to current law?
So first of all, this is not something that's happening in Poland only. For example, in Australia, it is a huge problem, but also in some other jurisdictions. It is also not something specific just to cryptocurrencies, because, for example, in the UK, there was a huge problem of bank accounts of payment institutions, so non-banks, but that also deal with payments processing and things like that. And for example, these firms were coming to Poland or to other countries in order to get bank accounts because they couldn't in the UK, right? And reasons are various, but one of them is that banks are quite, under huge pressure. They are pushed towards something that is called de-risking, right? So, for example, they have to deal with AML risk, or maybe ML risks, right? Money laundering risks. They are subject to strict regulations. Regulators demand from them that they will comply with these regulations, and they try to avoid any risky clients, right, in order to comply with these regulations. So that's not only the case that banks simply don't want to serve these clients; they are sometimes forced to that. And in Poland, it is not something new. So this was publicized some time ago that banks are, withdrawing from these agreements with some clients. But it is not something new. This was happening over the last years, but it accelerated very strongly after the statement or a warning from July this year of National Bank of Poland and KNF that said that basically that everyone should be aware of cryptocurrencies, right? And there was a huge wave of bank accounts being removed by banks from different entities that somehow were connected to cryptocurrencies. And it's really difficult to comment on that because basically there is like so this is a commercial agreement, right? You have two parties: a bank that is providing the account and some sort of customer, either a natural person or a crypto exchange or another entity, right? And this bank is, is free. This is freedom of contract to conclude contract with whoever it wants to, and withdraw from such contracts, right? There is no law. In principle, there is no law that forces bank to conclude such an agreement with everyone. But at the same time, you have this, this question: how could you conduct economic activity nowadays without having a bank account, right? So this is quite a complicated issue, and there was even a special team from the Polish Banking Association talking to cryptocurrency exchanges in order to develop some standards, right, of cooperation and things like that. So it is quite complex, right? It is not that it's regulated by any particular regulation, and you can just go to any authority and say, oh, they are breaking some laws because they are not allowing me to have a bank account, right? This is also very case specific, right? There might be different reasons for something like that.
Yeah, sure, but what I'm talking about is like there are terms of agreement, right? And I assume there wasn't stated anything about cryptocurrencies when the agreement was signed at the first place. So if one party is just terminating the contract and it's the party that is I would say stronger in this relationship. What is there any chance that we could, just fight back? Because as you said, in the end, you cannot provide and you cannot act with any economical activity without bank account nowadays. So
it's case specific, right? Sometimes banks in their terms and conditions have just some broad clauses that, for example, they have the right to withdraw from such an agreement if there is a reasonable suspicion that the account is used for illegal activity, right? And the assessment of whether it is the case or not is on the bank side, right? And banks are saying, oh, there are some suspicions that it is used for illegal activity, and then we simply remove from that agreement. And of course, you can fight in court, but imagine that you win in court. Would you like to be, to have an agreement with such a bank after something like that, right? So there are, in fact, you can try to fight back, but at the same time, there is, a very limited possibility to do something like that, right?
just move to another bank.
Yes, exactly. That's like the most feasible practical solution at the moment. Of course, in the situation where all banks are refusing to open such bank accounts, it would be like an issue, right? But I can imagine a scenario when banks are forced to do so by a regulator. There were some ideas to destroy the Polish cryptocurrency market in a way that all entities would be cut off from bank services, right? You can imagine something like that.
Okay, so we have another risk.
I'm not saying that it is a probable scenario, but I think I can imagine something like that.
Thank you for your comment.
Any more question? Okay, so thank you.